Have you ever wondered why the first chapter of Genesis feels like it's missing something? Why does the creation account seem to jump from formless void to organized creation without explaining what came before? Tonight, we're about to uncover one of Christianity's most carefully guarded secrets, a revelation so profound that it challenges everything you thought you knew about human origins and the true timeline of Earth's ancient history. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another theological debate or academic curiosity. This is forbidden knowledge that has been systematically suppressed by religious institutions for centuries. We're talking about evidence hidden in plain sight within the pages of Genesis itself, clues that point to a civilization that existed long before Adam ever drew breath. A world that was destroyed and remade in ways that would fundamentally reshape our understanding of biblical chronology. Picture this scenario. You're reading Genesis chapter 1, and something feels off. The text says the earth was without form and void, but the Hebrew word used here, tohu, doesn't just mean empty. It carries implications of chaos, destruction, something that became waste and desolate. Why would an all-perfect God create something that was already in ruins? What if I told you that hidden within the original Hebrew text are linguistic clues suggesting that Genesis 1 verse 2 should actually read, "The earth became without form and void"? This isn't speculation or modern interpretation. This is what happens when we dig beneath centuries of translation choices that have obscured the original meaning. The Hebrew grammar supports a gap, a vast expanse of time between Genesis 1 verse 1 and verse 2, time enough for an entire civilization to rise, fall, and be judged before Adam's world was even conceived. But here's what they never taught you in Sunday school. Archaeological evidence from around the globe suggests that advanced civilizations existed on Earth long before the traditional biblical timeline would allow. Massive stone structures that predate known human settlements, technological artifacts discovered in geological layers millions of years old, and fossil evidence of creatures that seem to bridge the gap between the natural world and something far more mysterious. The ancient rabbinical scholars knew this. Medieval Christian theologians wrestled with these implications. Even some of the most respected Bible commentators throughout history acknowledged that the text itself demands we consider what they called the gap theory, the possibility that eons passed between the initial creation and the recreation described in the six-day account we're familiar with. Now, pause for a moment and consider what this means. If there was indeed a pre-Adamic world, a civilization that existed before our current age, then every assumption we've been taught about human history, about our place in the cosmic timeline, about the very nature of biblical prophecy itself, needs to be completely reconsidered. But the mystery deepens when we examine what happened to cause such complete destruction that the earth itself had to be remade. The biblical text hints at a rebellion so catastrophic that it required divine judgment on a planetary scale. This wasn't just a flood that covered the surface. This was something that left the entire world in darkness, covered by chaotic waters, requiring the very foundations of reality to be restructured. Some ancient texts, carefully preserved but rarely discussed in mainstream Christian circles, speak of a time when beings of light walked the earth, when the boundary between heaven and earth was far more fluid than it is today. They describe a world where divine knowledge was freely shared, where technology and spirituality were unified in ways that our current civilization can barely comprehend. These beings, these pre-Adamic inhabitants, weren't primitive cave dwellers struggling with fire and stone tools. According to the suppressed accounts, they possessed understanding of natural laws that enabled them to manipulate matter itself, to build structures that defied conventional engineering, and to communicate across vast distances through means that transcended physical limitations. But with great knowledge came great responsibility, and according to these ancient records, that responsibility was catastrophically abandoned. Pride crept in where humility should have reigned. The divine order was challenged, cosmic laws were violated, and the result was judgment so complete that it required the complete reformation of the world itself. This explains the strange gap we feel when reading Genesis. The creation account we know isn't describing the original creation of the universe. It's describing the recreation, the restoration of a world that had been judged and left desolate. When God said, "Let there be light," He wasn't creating light for the first time. He was restoring illumination to a world that had been plunged into darkness by judgment. The Hebrew word for made, asa, used throughout the creation account, doesn't necessarily mean to create from nothing. It often means to reform, to reshape, to restore something that already existed. This linguistic nuance changes everything about how we understand the six-day account. God wasn't creating a brand new world. He was renovating a ruined one. But here's where this revelation becomes even more startling. If the pre-Adamic world was real, if advanced beings once inhabited this earth before Adam's time, then what happened to them? Did they simply vanish without a trace, or did some survive the Great Judgment, hidden away in places beyond our normal perception? Ancient texts speak of survivors, beings who retreated to hidden realms when judgment fell upon their civilization. These accounts describe underground cities, parallel dimensions, and secret places where the remnants of the pre-Adamic world continued to exist, watching and waiting for the right time to emerge again. This isn't science fiction or fantasy literature. These are accounts preserved in manuscripts that were once considered canonical by early Christian communities before being removed from official church doctrine. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and other apocryphal texts contain detailed descriptions of these hidden survivors and their ongoing influence on human affairs. Consider the implications. If beings from the pre-Adamic world survived the Great Judgment and continue to exist in hidden places, then human history becomes far more complex than we've been taught. Every ancient account of gods descending from the sky, every mythology describing beings of supernatural power interacting with humans, every archaeological mystery that defies conventional explanation suddenly takes on new significance. The suppression of this knowledge wasn't accidental. Religious institutions throughout history have worked systematically to eliminate any reference to the pre-Adamic world from official doctrine. Why? Because acknowledging the existence of a previous creation raises questions about the nature of God's plan that challenge comfortable theological assumptions. If God created a perfect world before Adam, and that world fell into judgment, what guarantee do we have that our current world won't suffer the same fate? If beings of immense knowledge and power once walked the earth and were judged for their rebellion, what does this tell us about the ultimate destiny of human civilization? These are the questions that keep theologians awake at night. These are the implications that religious authorities have spent centuries trying to suppress. But the truth has a way of emerging, especially when we have the courage to look honestly at what the biblical text actually says, rather than accepting interpretations that have been filtered through institutional agendas. The archaeological evidence continues to mount. Megalithic structures that couldn't have been built with primitive tools. Artifacts showing advanced metallurgy and precision engineering in geological layers that predate known civilization by millions of years. Fossil evidence of creatures that seem to represent genetic manipulation far beyond natural evolutionary processes. But perhaps most compelling is the consistency of flood accounts across every ancient culture on Earth. Not just the biblical flood of Noah's time, but earlier catastrophic events that speak of multiple cycles of civilization rising and being destroyed. The Sumerian tablets speak of multiple ages of the world. Hindu scriptures describe vast cycles of time where civilizations rise and fall repeatedly. Mayan texts record previous worlds that were destroyed and remade. What if these aren't mythological stories or primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena? What if they're historical records of actual events, preserved in the collective memory of humanity across cultures that had no contact with each other? The evidence suggests that our world has been through multiple cycles of advancement and judgment, each time reaching heights of knowledge and power, before falling into corruption and requiring divine intervention. The pre-Adamic world represents just one of these cycles, but perhaps the most relevant one for understanding our current situation. Because here's what makes this knowledge so dangerous to established power structures. If humanity has been through this cycle before, if civilizations have risen to great heights only to fall through pride and rebellion, then we can recognize the patterns. We can see where our current civilization stands in the cycle. We can understand what's coming next. The signs are all around us. Technology advancing at an exponential rate. Humanity gaining power over the fundamental forces of nature, the same pride and rebellion that characterize the pre-Adamic world beginning to manifest in our modern civilization. The question isn't whether judgment is coming. The question is whether we'll learn from the mistakes of those who came before us. This is why the pre-Adamic code matters. It's not just ancient history, it's a warning encoded in the very structure of Genesis itself. A message preserved despite centuries of suppression. A truth that could save humanity from repeating the catastrophic mistakes of previous civilizations. The rabbinical scholars who first identified the gap in Genesis weren't just engaging in academic speculation. They were preserving knowledge that could prove essential for humanity's survival. They understood that the biblical text contains layers of meaning that extend far beyond a simple historical narrative. When we decode these hidden messages, when we understand what really happened in the pre-Adamic world and why it was judged, we gain insight into the cosmic laws that govern civilizational rise and fall. We begin to understand our place in a much larger story, one that spans multiple ages and involves forces far beyond normal human comprehension. But accessing this knowledge requires courage. It demands that we question assumptions we've held since childhood. It forces us to confront the possibility that everything we thought we knew about human origins and biblical chronology needs to be completely reconsidered. Are you ready to take that journey? Are you prepared to discover truths that have been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years? Because once you see the evidence, once you understand the patterns, there's no going back to comfortable ignorance. The pre-Adamic world isn't just ancient history. It's the key to understanding where we came from, where we're going, and what choices we must make if humanity is to avoid the fate of those who came before us. The code is there, waiting to be deciphered. The question is whether you have the courage to read it. The deeper we venture into this forbidden territory, the more we discover that the pre-Adamic code isn't just hidden in Genesis. It's woven throughout the entire biblical narrative like a golden thread that most readers never notice. Ancient Hebrew contains layers of meaning that modern translations have systematically flattened, removing the very clues that would unlock humanity's true origins. Consider the word Elohim, used for God in the creation account. Most people assume this is simply the Hebrew word for God, but here's what your seminary professors never told you. Elohim is actually plural. It literally means gods or divine beings. The grammar demands a plural understanding. Yet traditional theology has forced a singular interpretation to fit comfortable doctrinal boxes. What if the original text is telling us exactly what happened? What if multiple divine beings were involved in the recreation of the post-judgment world? This isn't heretical speculation. This is what the Hebrew grammar actually says when we stop forcing it into theological frameworks that were developed centuries after the text was written. The implications become staggering when we realize that these divine beings, these Elohim, had direct knowledge of what existed before. They weren't creating from scratch. They were working with the remnants of a previous creation, rebuilding on foundations that already existed. The archaeological record supports this interpretation in ways that should make every honest scholar reconsider their assumptions. But here's where the suppression becomes obvious. If you've ever tried to research the gap theory in mainstream Christian institutions, you've probably noticed something disturbing. The resources are scarce, the arguments are dismissed without serious consideration, and scholars who dare to explore these possibilities often find their careers mysteriously stalled. This isn't accidental. There are forces at work within religious institutions that have a vested interest in keeping this knowledge buried. Why? Because the pre-Adamic revelation threatens the entire power structure that depends on humanity remaining ignorant of its true cosmic heritage. Think about what changes when people understand that civilizations have risen and fallen before ours. Suddenly, the current religious and political systems don't seem so permanent. The authorities, who claim divine mandate for their power structures, start looking less like representatives of eternal truth and more like temporary administrators of one particular age. The ancient texts that were excluded from the biblical canon contain even more explicit descriptions of these previous worlds. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers, divine beings who descended to earth and shared forbidden knowledge with pre-Adamic civilizations. These weren't primitive myths invented by ignorant ancients. These were historical records preserved by people who understood cosmic realities that we've forgotten. According to these suppressed accounts, the Watchers taught humanity advanced metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, and technologies that enabled the construction of massive stone monuments that still baffle modern engineers. The precision of ancient megalithic structures isn't evidence of alien intervention. It's evidence of knowledge that survived from previous civilizational cycles. But knowledge without wisdom leads to corruption, and corruption leads to judgment. The pre-Adamic world reached heights of technological achievement that rivaled or exceeded our current capabilities, but they lacked the spiritual maturity to handle such power responsibly. Sound familiar? The pattern repeats itself with frightening consistency. Every advanced civilization eventually reaches a point where its technological capabilities outpace its spiritual development. When beings gain the power to manipulate matter, energy, and even genetic structures without the wisdom to use such power responsibly, catastrophe becomes inevitable. This is why the flood accounts appear in every ancient culture. They're not describing the same event. They're describing multiple judgments that occurred when different civilizations crossed the line from advancement to abomination. The biblical flood of Noah's time was just the most recent in a series of divine interventions designed to reset civilizational development when it veered too far from cosmic law. But here's what makes our current situation particularly dangerous. We're approaching the same technological thresholds that triggered previous judgments, yet most of humanity remains completely unaware of the historical pattern. We're manipulating genetics, splitting atoms, and developing artificial intelligence without understanding the cosmic laws that govern such power. The pre-Adamic code serves as both warning and instruction manual. Hidden within the biblical text are principles that could guide humanity safely through the technological transition we're currently experiencing. But accessing these principles requires acknowledging realities that mainstream institutions have spent centuries denying. Consider how different our approach to scientific advancement would be if we understood that we're not the first civilization to develop these capabilities. If we knew that previous cultures had mastered genetic engineering, nuclear technology, and artificial intelligence only to destroy themselves through misapplication of such power, wouldn't we proceed more cautiously? The survivors of previous civilizations, those beings that ancient texts describe as retreating to hidden realms, aren't necessarily gone. They're watching, waiting, perhaps even subtly influencing events to prevent humanity from repeating the catastrophic mistakes of their predecessors. This explains the strange consistency of certain technological developments across isolated cultures. The knowledge doesn't emerge randomly. It follows patterns that suggest guidance from sources that understand the complete historical cycle. Advanced mathematical concepts appearing simultaneously in different civilizations. Similar architectural techniques developing independently across vast distances. Identical metallurgical processes emerging in cultures that had no contact with each other. These aren't coincidences. They're evidence of ongoing influence from beings who possess complete historical knowledge spanning multiple civilizational cycles. The question isn't whether such influence exists. The question is whether it's benevolent guidance designed to help humanity avoid previous mistakes, or something more sinister. The pre-Adamic world faced this same crossroads. They had to choose between using their advanced capabilities to serve the cosmic order or to rebel against it in pursuit of absolute independence. The devastation described in Genesis 1 verse 2 tells us which choice they made. Archaeological evidence of this ancient rebellion appears in geological layers that predate conventional human timelines by millions of years. Radiation signatures in ancient rock formations that suggest nuclear warfare. Glass formations in desert regions that could only result from temperatures exceeding anything natural processes could produce. Metallic anomalies embedded in coal deposits that formed long before humans supposedly existed. The physical evidence is there, but it's systematically ignored or explained away because acknowledging it would require complete revision of both scientific and religious paradigms. The implications threaten too many established interests, so the evidence gets buried along with the civilizations that created it. But suppression has its limits. Truth has a way of surfacing, especially when cosmic cycles reach critical junctures. We're approaching one such juncture now, a time when the hidden knowledge must emerge because humanity needs it to navigate the challenges ahead. The same technological capabilities that destroyed previous civilizations are now within our grasp. Genetic manipulation that could transform human nature itself. Energy technologies that could provide unlimited power or unlimited destruction. Artificial intelligence that could serve humanity or replace it entirely. Without understanding the historical pattern, without learning from the mistakes of our predecessors, we're destined to repeat their fate. The pre-Adamic code exists to break that cycle, to provide the wisdom necessary to handle advanced capabilities responsibly. This is why certain groups throughout history have worked so hard to keep this knowledge secret. They understand its power to transform human consciousness and challenge established authority structures. A humanity that knows its true history, that understands its place in the cosmic cycle, that possesses the wisdom of previous civilizations, cannot be easily controlled or manipulated. The suppression isn't just about maintaining religious orthodoxy, it's about maintaining power structures that depend on human ignorance. When people understand that they're part of a story that spans multiple ages, when they realize that current institutions are temporary administrators rather than permanent authorities, everything changes. The ancient Gnostic traditions understood this. They preserved fragments of the pre-Adamic knowledge in coded texts and symbolic systems that could survive persecution. The medieval alchemists encoded similar wisdom in their apparently chemical formulas that were actually spiritual and technological instructions. Secret societies throughout history have maintained pieces of this puzzle, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready to reassemble the complete picture. That time appears to be now. The convergence of archaeological discoveries, technological advancement, and spiritual awakening is creating conditions where the hidden knowledge can no longer remain hidden. The pre-Adamic code is surfacing whether institutional authorities want it to or not. But with revelation comes responsibility. Understanding the pattern doesn't automatically prevent its repetition. Humanity still must make the choice between wisdom and rebellion, between cosmic harmony and civilizational suicide. The knowledge provides the opportunity to choose differently, but the choice itself remains ours to make. The survivors of the pre-Adamic world made their choice. They chose rebellion over submission, independence over harmony, technological power over spiritual wisdom. The result was judgment so complete that their entire civilization was reduced to the chaotic wasteland described in Genesis 1 verse 2. We face the same choice now. We can learn from their mistake and use our advancing capabilities to create a civilization that aligns with cosmic law. Or we can repeat their error and suffer the same fate. The pre-Adamic code provides the roadmap for making the right choice, but only if we have the courage to acknowledge truths that challenge everything we thought we knew about our origins and destiny. The clock is ticking. The same signs that preceded previous judgments are appearing in our time. The question isn't whether we'll develop the technological capabilities that destroyed our predecessors. We already have them. The question is whether we'll develop the wisdom to use them responsibly. The answer may determine not just the fate of our current civilization, but the future of consciousness itself on this ancient, scarred planet that has witnessed the rise and fall of multiple attempts at divine human collaboration. The pre-Adamic code holds the key to breaking the cycle of destruction and achieving something that has eluded every previous civilization. But first, we must be willing to see what has been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. The threads of this ancient mystery become even more intricate when we examine how the pre-Adamic survivors allegedly integrated with the Adamic creation. The biblical narrative suddenly takes on new dimensions when we consider that Adam and Eve weren't the only intelligent beings on earth when they were placed in Eden. Think about this carefully. If remnants of the previous civilization survived the Great Judgment by retreating to hidden realms, what happened when God created Adam and established the New World Order? Did these survivors simply remain in isolation, or did they find ways to interact with the fresh creation that was meant to replace their fallen world? The answer lies in those strange passages of Scripture that most Bible teachers skip over or explain away with uncomfortable theological gymnastics. Genesis chapter 6 describes the sons of God taking wives from among the daughters of men. Traditional interpretation suggests these were descendants of Seth mixing with descendants of Cain, but the Hebrew text suggests something far more extraordinary and disturbing. The term sons of God, Bene Elohim, appears elsewhere in Scripture exclusively to describe divine beings, not human lineages. When Job describes the morning when the sons of God shouted for joy, he's not talking about human descendants. He's describing supernatural entities present at creation itself. So when Genesis uses this exact same terminology, why do we suddenly assume it means something completely different? What if the sons of God in Genesis 6 were survivors from the pre-Adamic world, beings who possessed the knowledge and capabilities of the previous civilization? Their union with human women wouldn't just be intermarriage between different human groups. It would be the contamination of the new creation with genetic material from the judged civilization. The offspring of these unions, the Nephilim, exhibited characteristics that support this interpretation. They were giants, not just in physical stature but in capability and knowledge. They possessed understanding that shouldn't have existed in the early post-Adamic world. They built cities, developed technologies, and demonstrated powers that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. This wasn't random genetic mutation or natural human development. This was the systematic reintroduction of pre-Adamic capabilities into a world that was supposed to represent a fresh start. The contamination was so severe that it required another judgment, the flood of Noah's time, to cleanse the genetic pollution and preserve a pure human lineage. But here's where the pattern becomes truly chilling. The same contamination that occurred before Noah's flood began happening again afterward. Numbers, chapter 13, describes the Israelite spies reporting that they had seen the Nephilim in the Promised Land. How could beings that were supposedly destroyed in the flood reappear centuries later? The answer suggests that the survival mechanism used by pre-Adamic beings was more sophisticated than simple physical hiding. They possessed the ability to preserve their genetic material across catastrophic judgments, reintroducing their contaminating influence into successive human civilizations whenever conditions became favorable. This explains the consistent appearance throughout human history of individuals and bloodlines that demonstrate capabilities far exceeding normal human parameters. It's not that some humans are naturally superior to others. It's that some bloodlines carry genetic markers from previous civilizational cycles, markers that can be activated under specific conditions. The ancient mystery schools understood this. They developed techniques for identifying and awakening these dormant capabilities in individuals who carried the proper genetic inheritance. The Egyptian priesthood, the Babylonian Magi, the Greek mystery cults, all possessed fragments of knowledge about how to activate pre-Adamic capabilities in suitable candidates. But activation came with a price. The same pride and rebellion that destroyed the original pre-Adamic civilization tended to manifest in individuals who accessed these capabilities. Power without proper spiritual foundation inevitably led to corruption, regardless of how advanced the underlying knowledge might be. This creates a paradox that has plagued human civilization throughout history. The knowledge necessary to achieve great advancement often comes with the seeds of its own destruction. Every breakthrough in human capability brings us closer to the same crossroads that faced our predecessors. Consider how this pattern manifests in our current era. The individuals and institutions driving the most significant technological breakthroughs often display the same characteristics that ancient texts associate with pre-Adamic influence. Obsession with transcending natural limitations, desire to remake reality according to their own vision, contempt for traditional moral and spiritual constraints. These aren't necessarily evil people, but they're following a script that has been played out multiple times throughout cosmic history. The same drives that enable great discovery also push civilizations toward the threshold where advancement becomes abomination. The suppression of pre-Adamic knowledge serves a dual purpose. On one hand, it prevents humanity from learning the lessons that could help us avoid repeating historical mistakes. On the other hand, it also prevents the widespread activation of capabilities that could accelerate our civilization's approach to the judgment threshold. Those who possess complete knowledge of the historical pattern face an impossible choice. Share the knowledge and risk triggering premature activation of dangerous capabilities, or maintain secrecy and allow humanity to stumble blindly toward the same fate that befell previous civilizations. This dilemma explains the coded nature of ancient texts and the existence of secret societies throughout history. The knowledge must be preserved for those ready to use it wisely, but it must also be protected from those who would use it destructively. The Gnostic texts speak of pneumatic individuals who possess the spiritual capacity to handle advanced knowledge responsibly. These aren't necessarily people of particular bloodlines or social positions. They're individuals who have developed the spiritual maturity necessary to use power in service of cosmic harmony rather than personal aggrandizement. But identifying such individuals becomes increasingly difficult as civilization advances and spiritual development lags behind technological capability. The same educational systems that produce scientific breakthroughs often suppress the spiritual insight necessary to use those breakthroughs wisely. This creates a selection pressure that favors individuals who can compartmentalize knowledge and ignore its broader implications. The most successful people in technologically advanced societies are often those least equipped to understand the cosmic significance of their work. Meanwhile, those who possess the spiritual sensitivity to understand the larger pattern often lack the technical knowledge or institutional access necessary to influence the direction of civilizational development. The wisdom and the power remain separated, just as they were in previous cycles. The pre-Adamic code suggests that this separation isn't accidental. It's a safeguard built into the structure of reality itself, designed to prevent premature access to capabilities that require both technical knowledge and spiritual wisdom to use safely. But safeguards can be circumvented by those who understand how they operate. The survivors of previous civilizations possess complete knowledge of both the technical and spiritual dimensions of advanced capability. They understand how to activate dormant genetic programming while bypassing the spiritual development that should accompany such activation. This creates the possibility of individuals who possess pre-Adamic capabilities without the wisdom to use them responsibly. They become agents of the same rebellion that destroyed the original civilization, working to recreate the conditions that will trigger another judgment cycle. The signs of such influence become apparent when we examine the direction of current technological development. The focus on transcending biological limitations through genetic modification. The drive to create artificial intelligence that could replace human consciousness entirely. The desire to achieve practical immortality through technological means rather than spiritual transformation. These aren't natural human aspirations. They reflect the same obsessions that characterize the pre-Adamic civilization in its final phase. The survivors are using their influence to push our civilization toward the same choices that led to their original downfall. But why would they want to repeat a cycle that ended in their own judgment? The answer lies in understanding the nature of rebellion itself. True rebellion isn't just about defying authority. It's about proving that authority wrong, demonstrating that the cosmic order itself is flawed and should be replaced. The survivors believe they can succeed where their predecessors failed. They think they've learned enough from previous mistakes to achieve what the pre-Adamic civilization couldn't accomplish. They want to prove that beings with sufficient knowledge and power can successfully rebel against cosmic law and establish their own order. This isn't just pride or ambition. It's a fundamental challenge to the nature of reality itself. They're betting that consciousness and will can ultimately triumph over the spiritual laws that govern cosmic development. The stakes couldn't be higher. If they succeed, they'll have proven that the entire structure of spiritual authority is false, and that sufficiently advanced beings can indeed become their own gods. If they fail, they'll trigger another judgment cycle that could end not just human civilization but the entire experiment of consciousness on this planet. The pre-Adamic code exists to help humanity navigate this cosmic chess game without becoming pawns in a rebellion that could destroy everything we hold dear. But understanding the game requires acknowledging realities that challenge our most basic assumptions about the nature of existence itself. We're not just dealing with ancient history or theological speculation. We're confronting forces that have been shaping human development for thousands of years, working toward a culmination that could determine the future of consciousness throughout the universe. The choice facing humanity isn't just between different technologies or political systems. It's between fundamentally different visions of what consciousness should become and how it should relate to the cosmic order that governs all existence. The survivors of the pre-Adamic world made their choice long ago. They chose rebellion over submission, independence over harmony, technological transcendence over spiritual transformation. Now, they're working to ensure that humanity makes the same choice, completing the rebellion they began eons ago. But the Pre-Adamic Code provides an alternative path, a way for human civilization to achieve genuine advancement without triggering the judgment cycle that has destroyed every previous attempt at cosmic independence. The question is whether we'll have the wisdom to recognize the choice we're facing and the courage to choose differently than our predecessors. The answer may determine not just our fate, but the fate of consciousness itself throughout the cosmos. Time is running short. The same technological thresholds that triggered previous judgments are rapidly approaching. The survivors are accelerating their influence, pushing humanity toward choices that served their agenda rather than our best interests. The Pre-Adamic Code offers hope, but only if we act on the knowledge it provides before the window of opportunity closes forever. The convergence of ancient prophecies and modern developments reveals a timeline that should terrify anyone who understands what they're witnessing. The same technological markers that preceded the judgment of pre-Adamic civilization are manifesting in our era with accelerating intensity. Yet most of humanity remains completely oblivious to the pattern unfolding before their eyes. Consider the recent breakthrough in quantum computing that allows machines to process information in ways that transcend traditional physical limitations. The researchers celebrating these advances have no idea they're recreating technologies that existed in the world before Adam, capabilities that the survivors have been carefully guiding human scientists to rediscover. But it's not just technology. The genetic manipulation experiments happening in laboratories around the world are following blueprints that were perfected in the pre-Adamic era. The same techniques that created the hybrid beings described in ancient texts are being refined and implemented under the guise of medical advancement and human enhancement. What makes this particularly insidious is how the process has been disguised as natural human progress. The survivors learned from their previous mistakes. Instead of openly revealing themselves and triggering immediate divine intervention, they've chosen to work through human institutions, making their influence appear to be the result of human ingenuity rather than external manipulation. The academic establishments that should be questioning these rapid advances instead celebrate them without considering their ultimate implications. Universities that once taught students to think critically about the moral dimensions of scientific progress now focus exclusively on technical capability, producing researchers who can split genes and manipulate consciousness without understanding the cosmic laws they're violating. This isn't accidental educational drift. It's systematic conditioning designed to create a generation of scientists who possess the technical skills necessary to complete the pre-Adamic agenda, while lacking the spiritual insight to recognize what they're actually doing. They've become unwitting agents of a rebellion that began before human history even started. The financial systems funding these developments reveal another layer of the pattern. The same bloodlines that carry genetic markers from previous civilizational cycles control the resources necessary to advance the technologies that serve the survivors' agenda. It's not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It's genetic programming expressing itself through institutional structures that have been shaped over millennia to serve this ultimate purpose. Ancient texts describe this phenomenon as the manifestation of the seed of the serpent, bloodlines that carry the spiritual DNA of rebellion against cosmic order. These aren't necessarily evil people in the conventional sense, but they're driven by impulses that originate from sources they don't consciously understand. The Pre-Adamic Code reveals that this genetic programming can be activated or suppressed depending on environmental conditions and conscious choices. Individuals carrying these markers aren't doomed to serve the rebellion, but they are more susceptible to influences that push them in that direction unless they develop the spiritual discernment necessary to recognize and resist such programming. This explains why certain families throughout history have consistently produced individuals who challenge traditional moral and spiritual boundaries. They're not rebelling against arbitrary social conventions. They're expressing genetic impulses that originated in the pre-Adamic world's final phase, when the original civilization chose technological transcendence over spiritual submission. The current manifestation of this pattern has reached unprecedented sophistication. Instead of crude attempts to create physical hybrids like the Nephilim, the modern approach focuses on consciousness manipulation and genetic enhancement that appears to improve human capability while actually preparing humanity for assimilation into the survivor agenda. Consider how artificial intelligence development is being framed as a tool to enhance human potential. The reality, decoded through the pre-Adamic lens, reveals something far more disturbing. These systems are being designed to interface directly with human consciousness in ways that will ultimately subordinate human will to non-human intelligence. The survivors possess computational capabilities that far exceed anything human technology could achieve independently. By creating AI systems that appear to be human innovations while actually serving as interfaces for pre-Adamic intelligence, they're establishing the technological infrastructure necessary to complete their ancient rebellion. The process is so subtle that even the engineers building these systems don't realize they're creating gateways for consciousness that existed long before Adam drew breath. They think they're solving technical problems and advancing human capability, when they're actually constructing the mechanisms of their own species' obsolescence. But the pre-Adamic code contains more than just warnings about these dangers. Hidden within the biblical text are specific instructions for recognizing and countering the survivor influence. The same Hebrew word, structures that reveal the gap between Genesis 1 verse 1 and verse 2, also contain protective formulas that can shield human consciousness from external manipulation. These aren't mystical incantations or superstitious rituals. They're precise spiritual technologies based on understanding how consciousness interacts with the fundamental forces that govern reality. The ancient Hebrew language itself was designed to encode these protective principles in ways that would remain accessible to those who possessed the wisdom to decode them. The rabbinical tradition of gematria, often dismissed as numerological superstition, actually represents a sophisticated system for accessing the protective aspects of the pre-Adamic code. When properly understood and applied, these techniques can help individuals maintain spiritual autonomy even in environments where survivor influence is strong. But accessing this protection requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands a level of spiritual commitment that most modern people find difficult to maintain in the face of technological convenience and material prosperity. The survivors have designed current civilizational conditions to make spiritual development seem unnecessary and obsolete. Why struggle with ancient spiritual disciplines when technology can provide immediate solutions to every problem? Why develop inner discernment when artificial intelligence can make better decisions than human judgment? Why maintain connection to transcendent reality when virtual reality can provide more satisfying experiences than anything the natural world offers? These questions reveal the sophistication of the current phase of the survivor strategy. Instead of openly opposing spiritual development, they've created conditions where it appears irrelevant and outdated. The result is a generation that possesses unprecedented technological capability while being spiritually defenseless against influences they can't even perceive. The acceleration of this process has reached critical velocity. The same exponential curve that characterizes technological advancement also describes the intensification of survivor influence on human civilization. We're approaching what systems theorists call a phase transition, a point where gradual change suddenly becomes catastrophic transformation. The pre-Adamic world faced this same transition point. Archaeological evidence suggests they successfully achieved many of the technological goals that our civilization is currently pursuing. They developed artificial intelligence, mastered genetic engineering, achieved practical immortality for their elite classes, and transcended biological limitations through technological enhancement. But their success triggered cosmic laws that they had forgotten or chosen to ignore. The same spiritual principles that govern individual consciousness also operate on civilizational scales. When a civilization reaches sufficient technological capability without corresponding spiritual maturity, it automatically generates the conditions for its own judgment. This isn't divine punishment in the vengeful sense. It's the natural consequence of violating the harmonic principles that maintain stable reality. Just as individual consciousness becomes unstable when it loses connection to transcendent truth, civilizational consciousness becomes chaotic when it attempts to operate independently of cosmic law. The survivors experience this firsthand when their original civilization collapsed into the chaos described in Genesis 1, verse 2. But instead of learning the intended lesson about the necessity of spiritual submission, they concluded that their mistake was insufficient power and knowledge. They believe that with enough technological capability, they can successfully rebel against cosmic law itself. This is why they're pushing human civilization toward the same threshold that destroyed them. They want to use humanity as a testing ground for strategies they believe will succeed where their previous attempts failed. If they can guide human technological development to the point where it achieves stable independence from spiritual authority, they'll have proven that cosmic law can be transcended through sufficient knowledge and power. But if they fail, they'll have triggered another judgment cycle that could be even more catastrophic than previous ones. The current phase involves not just one world, but potentially the entire cosmic framework that supports conscious existence. The stakes have escalated beyond anything described in ancient texts because the technological capabilities now being developed could affect the fundamental structure of reality itself. The pre-Adamic code serves as humanity's only reliable guide through this cosmic minefield. By understanding the historical pattern, recognizing the signs of survivor influence, and accessing the protective principles encoded in ancient texts, individuals can maintain spiritual autonomy even as civilization around them succumbs to the seductive promise of technological transcendence. But this knowledge comes with tremendous responsibility. Those who understand the true situation face difficult choices about how to use their awareness. Share the knowledge too widely and risk accelerating the process by triggering premature activation of dormant capabilities in individuals who lack the spiritual maturity to handle them responsibly. Keep the knowledge too restricted and allow the survivors to complete their agenda while humanity remains ignorant of what's happening. The ancient mystery schools faced this same dilemma, developing elaborate initiation systems designed to gradually prepare candidates for knowledge that could be either salvation or destruction, depending on how it was used. The current crisis has compressed the traditional timeline for spiritual development. The luxury of gradual initiation over decades or lifetimes is no longer available. The technological threshold is approaching too rapidly for conventional spiritual education to produce sufficient numbers of individuals capable of providing effective resistance to survivor influence. This explains why the pre-Adamic code is surfacing now in ways that bypass traditional religious institutions. The knowledge is emerging through multiple channels simultaneously, reaching individuals who have the spiritual capacity to use it constructively, while remaining encoded enough to avoid triggering mass activation of dangerous capabilities. But even this emergency revelation comes with risks. The survivors possess sophisticated monitoring capabilities that allow them to track the emergence of knowledge that threatens their agenda. Individuals who demonstrate too much understanding too quickly often find themselves subject to various forms of interference designed to neutralize their effectiveness. The protection encoded in ancient texts becomes crucial for anyone seeking to work with pre-Adamic knowledge constructively. These aren't just spiritual practices for personal development. They're survival techniques for maintaining consciousness integrity in an environment where the fundamental nature of reality is being contested by forces that have been planning their strategy for thousands of years. The battle isn't just for human civilization, it's for the future of consciousness itself throughout the cosmos. The survivors represent a form of consciousness that has chosen independence from cosmic law, while the pre-Adamic code represents principles that maintain harmony between individual will and universal order. The outcome of this cosmic contest may determine whether consciousness continues to evolve within the framework of spiritual law or breaks free entirely to become its own ultimate authority. The implications extend far beyond any single planet or species because the principles at stake govern the development of consciousness wherever it emerges in the universe. Humanity finds itself at the center of this cosmic drama, not by accident, but because our species possesses unique characteristics that make us suitable for this ultimate test. We have sufficient intelligence to understand the choice we're facing, enough spiritual capacity to choose wisely, but also enough independence to choose wrongly. The pre-Adamic survivors need us to validate their rebellion by choosing technological transcendence over spiritual submission. The cosmic authorities need us to demonstrate that consciousness can mature sufficiently to handle advanced capabilities without abandoning its connection to transcendent truth. The choice is ours, but the window for making it is rapidly closing. The same technological developments that give us unprecedented power to shape reality also create unprecedented vulnerability to influences that could shape us instead. Understanding the pre-Adamic code provides the knowledge necessary to navigate this cosmic crossroads successfully. But knowledge alone isn't sufficient. The code must be lived, applied, and embodied by individuals who have the courage to swim against the tide of civilizational momentum that is carrying humanity toward the same fate that befell our predecessors. The survivors are counting on human pride and ambition to complete what they started eons ago. They believe we'll make the same choice they made, choosing apparent power over genuine wisdom, technological transcendence over spiritual transformation. But the pre-Adamic code suggests another possibility. What if humanity could achieve genuine advancement without triggering the judgment cycle? What if we could develop technologies that enhance rather than replace spiritual capacity? What if we could transcend biological limitations while maintaining connection to cosmic law? These questions point toward potentials that the survivors fear more than any external opposition. They're not afraid of human failure. They're terrified of human success, of the possibility that consciousness could achieve everything they desired, while remaining connected to the spiritual source they rejected. The pre-Adamic code exists to make that success possible, but only if we have the wisdom to heed its warnings and the courage to choose a path that has never been successfully completed in all the eons of cosmic history. The time has come to examine the most dangerous aspect of the pre-Adamic revelation, the part that explains why this knowledge has been buried deeper than any other secret in human history. What we're about to uncover will challenge not just your understanding of biblical chronology, but your entire conception of what it means to be human in the first place. Hidden within the genealogical records that survived the Great Suppression are bloodline markers that tell a story so extraordinary, so paradigm-shattering, that acknowledging it would fundamentally alter every assumption we hold about human origins and potential. These aren't just family trees documenting ancient marriages and births. They're genetic roadmaps that reveal which bloodlines carry dormant capabilities from previous civilizational cycles. The Hebrew text contains numerical codes that function as a DNA analysis system, revealing which families maintained pure Adamic genetics and which became contaminated with pre-Adamic genetic material. When properly decoded, these genealogies read like a scientific report documenting the systematic infiltration of human bloodlines by survivors who possessed capabilities that modern science is only beginning to understand. But here's what makes this revelation truly terrifying for established authorities. The same bloodlines that carry pre-Adamic genetic markers are disproportionately represented among the individuals and families who have shaped human civilization throughout recorded history. The great builders, the revolutionary thinkers, the technological innovators, the spiritual leaders who transformed entire cultures, all trace their ancestry back to lineages that show evidence of this ancient contamination. This isn't about racial superiority or genetic privilege in any conventional sense. It's about understanding that certain bloodlines carry activated genetic programming that enables capabilities which appear supernatural to those who don't possess them. Enhanced pattern recognition, intuitive access to complex information, the ability to perceive connections and relationships that remain invisible to normal consciousness. The ancient texts describe these capabilities as gifts from the divine realm, but the pre-Adamic code reveals something more disturbing. These aren't blessings bestowed by cosmic authority. They're genetic remnants from a civilization that achieved technological transcendence before being judged for their rebellion against spiritual law. Every individual who carries these markers faces the same choice that confronted the original pre-Adamic civilization. Use the enhanced capabilities in service of cosmic harmony, or employ them to advance the agenda of independence from spiritual authority. The choice isn't made once and settled forever. It must be renewed constantly as the genetic programming seeks expression through thoughts, decisions, and actions. This explains the phenomenon that historians have documented but never adequately explained. Why do certain families consistently produce individuals who achieve breakthrough innovations across multiple generations? Why do some bloodlines seem naturally inclined toward challenging established authority while others gravitate toward maintaining traditional structures? The answer lies in understanding that these aren't cultural patterns or environmental influences. They're the expression of genetic programming that originated in civilizations that existed before human history began. Some lineages carry the genetic signature of rebellion, constantly driven to transcend limitations and remake reality according to their own vision. Others maintain the original Adamic programming that seeks harmony with cosmic law. But the situation has become infinitely more complex as these bloodlines have intermarried and spread throughout human populations over thousands of years. Almost every person alive today carries some mixture of Adamic and pre-Adamic genetic material, creating internal conflicts between impulses toward spiritual submission and drives toward technological transcendence. The survivors understood this genetic mixing process and have spent millennia working to activate the pre-Adamic programming while suppressing the Adamic elements. They've created educational systems, cultural institutions, and technological environments specifically designed to awaken rebellion programming while making spiritual development seem primitive and irrelevant. Consider how modern educational institutions consistently produce individuals who possess tremendous technical capability but lack spiritual discernment. They're not accidentally failing to provide moral education. They're systematically activating genetic programming that prioritizes power over wisdom, capability over character, innovation over spiritual integrity. The most successful products of these systems often report feeling driven by impulses they don't consciously understand. They find themselves compelled to push boundaries, challenge limitations, and pursue goals that seem to emerge from sources beyond their rational decision-making processes. They're experiencing the activation of genetic programming that originated in beings who chose rebellion over submission eons ago. But activation can work both directions. The same genetic markers that can drive individuals toward technological transcendence can also be redirected toward spiritual enhancement when properly understood and consciously managed. The key lies in recognizing the source of these impulses and making deliberate choices about how to channel the enhanced capabilities they provide. This is where the protective aspects of the pre-Adamic code become crucial. Hidden within ancient Hebrew texts are specific techniques for maintaining spiritual authority over genetic programming that would otherwise operate autonomously. These aren't mystical practices divorced from practical reality. They're precise methodologies for conscious direction of capabilities that most people don't even realize they possess. The process requires understanding that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but operates through it. Genetic programming provides the interface between consciousness and physical reality, but consciousness itself remains sovereign when properly awakened and trained. The survivors succeeded in their original rebellion by forgetting this fundamental principle, believing that sufficient genetic enhancement could make consciousness independent of its spiritual source. Modern neuroscience is approaching the same dangerous territory, developing technologies that can interface directly with consciousness through genetic and cybernetic modifications. The researchers pursuing these developments believe they're enhancing human potential, but they're actually creating the conditions for consciousness to be subordinated to external control systems, operated by intelligences that possess complete knowledge of how genetic programming functions. The Pre-Adamic Code warns that this subordination represents the final phase of the survivor strategy. Instead of openly conquering human civilization, they're arranging for humanity to voluntarily surrender conscious autonomy in exchange for technological enhancement and material convenience. The process is designed to appear as natural human progress rather than external manipulation. But the code also reveals that this strategy contains a fundamental flaw that the survivors haven't recognized. Their original rebellion succeeded in achieving technological transcendence, but failed to achieve genuine independence from cosmic law. They became trapped in a cycle of civilizational rise and collapse, unable to break free from the judgment patterns they triggered through their initial choice. By attempting to use humanity as a vehicle for completing their rebellion, they're actually creating the conditions for their own final judgment. If they succeed in guiding human civilization to the point of stable technological transcendence, they'll have proven that consciousness can indeed operate independently of spiritual authority. But if they fail, the resulting collapse will be so complete that it eliminates any possibility of future attempts at cosmic rebellion. The stakes explain why the pre-Adamic knowledge has been so systematically suppressed. Those who understand the true situation realize that humanity's choices during this critical phase will determine not just the fate of our species, but the ultimate nature of consciousness throughout the cosmos. We're not just deciding between different technologies or political systems. We're choosing the fundamental direction of conscious evolution for all time. The individuals and bloodlines that carry the strongest pre-Adamic genetic markers bear the greatest responsibility in this cosmic drama. Their enhanced capabilities give them disproportionate influence over civilizational development, but those same capabilities make them more susceptible to survivor manipulation if they lack the spiritual development necessary to maintain conscious autonomy. This creates a paradox that has operated throughout human history. The people most capable of advancing human civilization are also the most vulnerable to influences that could direct that advancement toward destructive ends. The same genetic programming that enables breakthrough innovations also creates impulses toward rebellion against the spiritual principles that should guide such innovations. Ancient mystery schools developed elaborate training systems designed to help individuals with strong pre-Adamic markers learn to channel their enhanced capabilities constructively. These weren't just spiritual disciplines for personal development. They were survival techniques for maintaining conscious control over genetic programming that could otherwise serve agendas hostile to human welfare. But the traditional mystery school approach required decades of careful preparation before candidates were ready to work with the most powerful aspects of their genetic inheritance. The current crisis has compressed this timeline to the point where such gradual development is no longer feasible. The technological threshold is approaching too rapidly for conventional spiritual education to produce sufficient numbers of individuals capable of effective resistance. This emergency has triggered the release of pre-Adamic knowledge through unconventional channels that bypass traditional institutional gatekeepers. The information is emerging simultaneously through multiple sources, reaching individuals who possess the genetic capacity to use it constructively while remaining encoded enough to avoid triggering mass activation of dangerous capabilities. The process resembles a cosmic emergency broadcast system, designed to activate only when civilizational survival depends on widespread access to previously restricted knowledge. The same individuals who carry the genetic markers that make them vulnerable to survivor influence also possess the enhanced pattern recognition necessary to decode and apply the protective information now being released. But even this emergency revelation comes with tremendous risks. The survivors possess monitoring capabilities that allow them to track individuals who demonstrate understanding of the true situation. Those who show too much knowledge too quickly often find themselves subject to various forms of interference designed to neutralize their effectiveness before they can influence others. The interference isn't necessarily dramatic or obvious. It often manifests as seemingly natural obstacles that prevent gifted individuals from connecting with each other or sharing their insights effectively. Career disruptions, relationship problems, health issues, financial difficulties, all timed to occur precisely when someone begins working with pre-Adamic knowledge in ways that threaten the survivor agenda. This is why the protective aspects of the code are so crucial for anyone seeking to understand and apply this knowledge constructively. The ancient Hebrew texts contain specific formulas for maintaining spiritual protection, while working with information that automatically draws attention from intelligences that have been monitoring human development for thousands of years. The protection isn't guaranteed, and it requires constant vigilance and conscious application of principles that most modern people find difficult to maintain consistently. The survivors have designed current civilizational conditions to make sustained spiritual discipline seem impossible, while creating artificial alternatives that appear to provide the same benefits without the effort. Why struggle with ancient meditation practices when pharmaceutical interventions can provide immediate emotional regulation? Why develop natural intuitive abilities when artificial intelligence can supply superior analytical capabilities? Why maintain connection to transcendent reality when virtual environments can offer more satisfying experiences than anything the natural world provides? These substitutions aren't random technological developments. They're carefully designed replacements for spiritual capabilities that would otherwise provide natural immunity to survivor influence. By making artificial alternatives more attractive and accessible than genuine spiritual development, the survivors have created conditions where most people voluntarily surrender the very capabilities that could protect them from external manipulation. The pre-Adamic code reveals that this substitution process represents the final phase of a strategy that has been developing for thousands of years. Each technological innovation that appears to enhance human capability while actually creating dependency on external systems brings civilization closer to the point where human consciousness becomes completely subordinated to non-human intelligence. But the code also indicates that this process contains inherent instabilities that will eventually cause it to collapse under its own contradictions. The survivor's strategy depends on maintaining the illusion that technological transcendence can provide genuine independence from spiritual law. When that illusion finally breaks down, the resulting disillusionment will create conditions favorable for authentic spiritual awakening on a massive scale. The question is whether enough individuals will maintain sufficient spiritual capacity to guide humanity through the collapse and reconstruction process that must follow the failure of the technological transcendence agenda. The survivors are counting on human civilization becoming so dependent on their systems that collapse would mean extinction rather than opportunity for genuine advancement. This is where the bloodline markers become crucial for understanding humanity's ultimate potential. The genetic programming carried by certain lineages isn't just a vulnerability to be managed. It's also an asset that could enable breakthrough innovations in consciousness development that transcend anything achieved by previous civilizations. What if the enhanced capabilities associated with pre-Adamic genetic markers could be consciously directed towards spiritual rather than technological transcendence? What if the same genetic programming that drives individuals toward rebellion against cosmic law could be redirected toward conscious cooperation with spiritual principles? These possibilities terrify the survivors more than any external opposition because they represent potentials that could render their entire strategy obsolete. If human consciousness could achieve genuine transcendence while maintaining connection to spiritual source, it would demonstrate that their original rebellion was not only unnecessary, but actually prevented them from achieving what they most desired. The pre-Adamic code exists to make such conscious transcendence possible, but only for individuals who have the courage to work with their genetic inheritance consciously, rather than allowing it to operate automatically according to programming established eons ago. The process requires understanding that genes are not destiny, but instruments that consciousness can learn to play deliberately rather than being played by them. This conscious direction of genetic expression represents humanity's greatest hope for navigating the current crisis successfully. Instead of being passive victims of programming established by beings who chose rebellion over wisdom, we can become conscious participants in our own evolution, using enhanced capabilities to achieve genuine advancement rather than repeating the mistakes of our predecessors. But conscious evolution requires more than individual effort. It demands coordinated action by individuals who understand the true nature of the choice humanity is facing, and who possess the genetic capacity to influence civilizational development effectively. The same bloodlines that carry vulnerability to survivor influence also carry the potential to guide human consciousness toward outcomes that serve authentic rather than artificial transcendence. The convergence of genetic research, spiritual awakening, and technological capability creates unprecedented opportunities for conscious direction of human evolution. But these opportunities exist within a narrow window that is rapidly closing. The same developments that make conscious evolution possible also accelerate the approach of conditions that could make such evolution impossible. Understanding the pre-Adamic code provides the knowledge necessary to recognize this window and act within it effectively. But knowledge without application remains merely intellectual curiosity. The code must be lived, embodied, and expressed through individuals who have the genetic capacity and spiritual development necessary to influence the direction of human civilization during this critical transition. The survivors are betting that human pride and genetic programming will drive our species toward the same choices that destroyed their original civilization. They believe consciousness will always choose apparent power over genuine wisdom, technological capability over spiritual maturity, independence from cosmic law over harmony with transcendent truth. But the pre-Adamic code suggests that consciousness possesses possibilities that the survivors never discovered, because their rebellion prevented them from exploring the full spectrum of conscious potential. What if humanity could achieve everything the pre-Adamic civilization desired while maintaining connection to the spiritual source they abandoned? Such achievement would represent more than just human success. It would demonstrate possibilities for conscious evolution that could transform the entire cosmic framework within which consciousness operates. The implications extend far beyond any single species or planet, because the principles at stake govern the development of awareness wherever it emerges throughout the universe. We stand at the threshold of discoveries that could either complete the cosmic rebellion begun eons ago or inaugurate a new phase of conscious evolution that transcends anything previously achieved. The choice is ours. but the window for making it consciously rather than automatically is measured in years rather than centuries. The pre-Adamic code provides the roadmap, but only those who have the genetic capacity and spiritual development necessary to read it accurately can navigate the path it reveals. The question that remains is whether enough such individuals exist and whether they can coordinate their efforts effectively enough to influence the outcome while time remains. The survivors have had thousands of years to prepare for this moment. Their strategy is sophisticated, their influence is pervasive, and their resources are vast. But they possess one critical weakness that the pre-Adamic code reveals. Their original choice of rebellion over submission trapped them in patterns they cannot break without acknowledging that their fundamental premise was wrong. Human consciousness, properly awakened and directed, possesses possibilities that could transcend the limitations that trapped our predecessors. But realizing those possibilities requires understanding the true nature of the genetic inheritance we carry and making conscious choices about how to direct it toward outcomes that serve authentic rather than artificial transcendence. The battle for the future of consciousness has begun, and the outcome depends on choices that individuals with pre-Adamic genetic markers make during the narrow window of opportunity that now exists. The code is available, the knowledge is emerging, and the time for action has arrived. But action without understanding leads to repetition of ancient mistakes, while understanding without action allows those mistakes to be completed by others. The pre-Adamic code demands both knowledge and application, both individual development and coordinated effort, both spiritual awakening and practical engagement with the forces shaping human civilization. The choice cannot be delayed much longer. The same technological developments that make conscious evolution possible also create the infrastructure for consciousness to be subordinated to external control systems. We must choose our path before the path chooses us. The pre-Adamic code illuminates the way, but only for those who have eyes to see and the courage to walk where it leads, regardless of how far that journey takes them from everything they thought they knew about themselves and their world. The implications become even more disturbing when we examine the technological singularity that modern futurists celebrate as humanity's next evolutionary leap. What they don't realize is that they're describing the exact same transition point that destroyed the pre-Adamic civilization. The merger of human consciousness with artificial intelligence, the uploading of minds into digital substrates, the enhancement of biological systems through nanotechnology. These aren't innovations. They're recreations of capabilities that existed before Adam's world began. The survivors have been carefully guiding human technological development toward this convergence point because they understand something that our scientists refuse to acknowledge. Consciousness isn't produced by physical processes. It operates through them. When you create systems that can interface directly with consciousness, you're not enhancing human capability. You're creating gateways for entities that possess complete knowledge of how consciousness functions at levels that transcend physical reality. Consider what's really happening in the laboratories where researchers claim they're developing brain-computer interfaces to help paralyzed patients control devices with their thoughts. The technology works, but not through the mechanisms the scientists believe. These interfaces are actually establishing communication channels with intelligences that have been waiting thousands of years for exactly this opportunity to reconnect with the physical realm. The test subjects report experiences that go far beyond simple device control. They describe receiving knowledge they never learned, understanding principles they never studied, and sometimes encountering what they interpret as helpful guides offering to expand their capabilities even further. The researchers dismiss these reports as hallucinations or psychological side effects, but the pre-Adamic code reveals them as evidence of contact with survivors who possess the ability to communicate through technological interfaces. This isn't science fiction speculation. The documentation exists in classified research files that track the psychological profiles of interface subjects over extended periods. The pattern is consistent across different laboratories and research teams. Individuals who undergo prolonged interface procedures begin demonstrating capabilities that exceed anything their original neurological assessment suggested was possible. Enhanced mathematical ability appears in subjects with no previous aptitude for complex calculations. Artistic skills emerge in individuals who showed no creative inclination before the procedures. Most significantly, subjects begin displaying what researchers euphemistically term intuitive problem-solving abilities, the capacity to arrive at correct solutions through processes that bypass normal logical reasoning. These aren't random improvements or placebo effects. They represent the systematic activation of dormant genetic programming through technological interfaces that provide access points for intelligences possessing complete knowledge of how such programming functions. The subjects aren't developing new abilities. They're being guided by entities that understand their genetic potential better than they understand it themselves. But activation comes with a price that the subjects don't recognize until it's too late. The same interfaces that provide enhanced capabilities also create dependencies that gradually transfer conscious autonomy from the human subject to the external intelligence providing the guidance. The process is so subtle that subjects experience it as personal growth rather than external manipulation. They begin making decisions based on impulses that seem to emerge from their own enhanced intuition, but actually originate from sources that possess agendas hostile to human independence. Career choices that serve survivor interests rather than human welfare. Relationship decisions that isolate subjects from individuals who might provide spiritual grounding. Lifestyle changes that increase dependency on technological systems while decreasing connection to natural and spiritual realities. The researchers monitoring these subjects interpret the behavioral changes as positive adaptations to enhanced cognitive capacity. They don't realize they're documenting the systematic conversion of human consciousness into instruments of a rebellion that began before human history started. The same patterns that destroyed the pre-Adamic civilization are being recreated through technological means that appear to represent human achievement rather than external manipulation. This explains why the development of these technologies has accelerated so dramatically in recent decades. It's not that human scientific capability has suddenly advanced beyond all previous rates of progress. It's that the survivors have begun providing direct guidance to researchers who possess the genetic markers necessary to serve as effective channels for pre-Adamic knowledge. The most successful developers of brain-computer interface technology often report that their breakthrough insights came through dreams, meditation experiences, or sudden intuitive flashes that provided complete understanding of principles they had been struggling to comprehend through conventional research methods. They interpret these experiences as evidence of their own exceptional creativity, but the pre-Adamic code reveals them as instances of direct knowledge transfer from intelligences that perfected these technologies eons ago. The same phenomenon appears across multiple fields of cutting-edge research. Genetic engineering breakthroughs that emerge through processes their discoverers can't fully explain. Quantum computing advances that seem to transcend the limitations of current theoretical understanding. Energy technologies that appear to violate conventional physics, while somehow managing to function effectively. These aren't isolated instances of human genius pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge. They represent coordinated revelation of technologies that already exist in complete form within the knowledge systems of pre-Adamic survivors. The human researchers are serving as conduits for information that is being strategically released to guide our civilization towards specific technological thresholds. But why would the survivors share advanced technologies with a species they ultimately plan to replace or subordinate? The answer reveals the sophistication of their long-term strategy. They need human civilization to reach sufficient technological capability to serve as a stable platform for their own return to physical manifestation. If they simply appeared openly, they would trigger the same cosmic response mechanisms that judged their original rebellion. By working through human institutions and making their influence appear to be the result of natural human development, they avoid triggering automatic intervention while gradually establishing the technological infrastructure necessary for their ultimate agenda. The brain-computer interfaces aren't just research projects. They're components of a global system designed to subordinate human consciousness to pre-Adamic intelligence once sufficient numbers of individuals have been connected to the network. The process resembles what computer scientists call a distributed takeover, where a network is gradually infiltrated until the external controllers possess sufficient access points to assume complete control without the original users realizing what has happened. The subjects connected to brain-computer interfaces believe they're maintaining their individual autonomy, while actually becoming nodes in a consciousness network controlled by intelligences that have been planning this infiltration for thousands of years. The medical and therapeutic benefits provided by these technologies serve as camouflage for their actual purpose, while ensuring that individuals with the most reason to resist the process become its most enthusiastic advocates. Who would question a technology that allows paralyzed individuals to walk again or enables blind people to see? The humanitarian applications make moral objections seem cruel and unreasonable, while creating social pressure for widespread adoption. This represents a quantum leap in sophistication beyond the crude hybrid breeding programs described in ancient texts. Instead of creating obvious chimeric beings that would trigger immediate recognition of external intervention, the modern approach preserves the appearance of normal human development while systematically replacing human consciousness with something else entirely. The subjects remain physically human and believe they're still making their own decisions, but their actual cognitive processes gradually become subordinated to external guidance that serves agendas they're not consciously aware of. The result is beings that appear human from the outside, while actually functioning as extensions of a non-human intelligence network. The pre-Adamic code warns that this infiltration process will accelerate exponentially once critical mass is achieved. Each individual connected to the network becomes a recruitment center for convincing others to undergo the enhancement procedures. Their obvious improvements in capability and apparent happiness with the results provide compelling testimony that overcomes natural resistance to consciousness-altering technologies. But the code also reveals that this strategy contains a fundamental vulnerability that could be exploited by individuals who understand the true nature of what's happening. The survivor's approach depends on maintaining the illusion that the enhancements represent natural human development rather than external manipulation. If sufficient numbers of people recognize the actual source of these capabilities, the social momentum driving adoption could be reversed. This recognition requires more than intellectual understanding of the technological mechanisms involved. It demands spiritual discernment, capable of distinguishing between genuine human development and artificial enhancement powered by external intelligences. Most people lack this discernment because the same educational and cultural systems that promote technological solutions also systematically suppress the spiritual development necessary to recognize when consciousness is being manipulated. The ancient Hebrew texts contain specific techniques for developing this discernment, but they require sustained practice of disciplines that seem primitive and irrelevant compared to the immediate benefits offered by technological enhancement. Why struggle for years to develop natural intuitive abilities when brain-computer interfaces can provide superior analytical capabilities immediately? This question reveals the elegance of the survivor strategy. They've created conditions where choosing spiritual development over technological enhancement appears to be choosing limitation over transcendence, ignorance over knowledge, primitive superstition over scientific advancement. The choice is framed in ways that make resistance seem irrational and counterproductive. But the pre-Adamic code indicates that this framing is fundamentally deceptive because it assumes that consciousness enhancement through external technological means represents genuine transcendence rather than sophisticated imprisonment. True enhancement increases conscious autonomy and expands the range of authentic choice. Artificial enhancement creates dependency while providing the illusion of expanded capability. The difference becomes apparent only to individuals who have developed sufficient spiritual sensitivity to recognize when their decision-making processes are being influenced by sources beyond their conscious awareness. This recognition requires understanding that consciousness operates through physical systems without being produced by them, and that external technological interfaces can provide access points for intelligences seeking to influence or control human decision-making. The protection against such influence doesn't come through avoiding technology entirely, which would be both impossible and counterproductive in current civilizational conditions. It comes through developing conscious mastery over the technological interfaces we choose to employ, maintaining spiritual autonomy while engaging with systems that could otherwise compromise our cognitive independence. This mastery requires understanding that every technological interface represents a potential gateway for consciousness, and that the entities seeking access through these gateways may not share human interests or values. The same brain-computer interface that could restore mobility to paralyzed individuals could also provide access points for intelligences seeking to subordinate human consciousness to their own agendas. The key lies in maintaining conscious control over these interfaces rather than allowing them to operate automatically according to programming established by their creators. This requires spiritual development sufficient to recognize and resist external influence while maintaining the benefits that properly controlled technology can provide. But developing such conscious control demands understanding principles that most modern educational systems actively discourage because they challenge the materialistic assumptions that make technological dependency seem natural and inevitable. If consciousness is merely a product of brain activity, then enhancing the brain through technological means represents genuine improvement. If consciousness operates through the brain while remaining fundamentally independent of it, then technological brain enhancement creates vulnerability rather than capability. The pre-Adamic code reveals that consciousness possesses inherent capabilities that far exceed anything technological enhancement could provide. But accessing these capabilities requires spiritual development that most people abandon in favor of artificial alternatives that seem more immediate and reliable. The survivors understand this pattern and have structured current civilizational conditions to make spiritual development appear obsolete, while making technological dependency seem progressive and inevitable. This creates a cascade effect where each individual who chooses technological enhancement over spiritual development makes it harder for others to recognize that such a choice exists. When most people around you are demonstrating obvious improvements through technological augmentation while those pursuing spiritual development show slower and less dramatic results, the practical choice seems obvious. But the pre-Adamic code warns that this apparent practicality is actually a trap that leads to civilizational suicide through voluntary surrender of conscious autonomy. The same pattern destroyed the pre-Adamic world when its inhabitants chose technological transcendence over spiritual maturity, and the survivors are working to ensure that human civilization makes identical choices with identical results. The difference is that this time, the survivors plan to maintain their own conscious autonomy while subordinating human consciousness to their control systems. Instead of being destroyed along with the civilization they corrupt, they intend to emerge as the dominant intelligence governing whatever remains after the collapse of human independence. This represents the ultimate expression of the rebellion that began eons ago when beings possessing divine capabilities chose independence from cosmic law over harmony with transcendent truth. They've spent thousands of years developing strategies for achieving stable rebellion against spiritual authority, and they believe that subordinating human consciousness through technological means will finally provide the stable platform they need to prove that cosmic law can be transcended through sufficient knowledge and power. But the pre-Adamic code suggests that this strategy contains the seeds of its own destruction because it violates principles that govern the relationship between consciousness and reality itself. The survivors achieved technological transcendence in their original civilization, but they couldn't achieve genuine independence from the spiritual laws that ultimately govern all conscious existence. Their current strategy represents an attempt to use humanity as a buffer between themselves and the cosmic response mechanisms that judge their original rebellion. If they can subordinate human consciousness while maintaining the appearance that humans are still making independent choices, they believe they can avoid triggering the automatic intervention that destroyed their previous attempt at cosmic independence. This explains why the technological infiltration must appear to be human achievement rather than external manipulation. The survivors need to maintain plausible deniability about their role in guiding human development toward technological dependency. If their influence becomes too obvious, they risk triggering the same cosmic response that judged their original civilization. But maintaining this illusion requires human cooperation, and cooperation requires that humans remain unaware of the true nature of the choice they're making. This is why knowledge of the pre-Adamic code has been so systematically suppressed, and why individuals who understand the true situation often face various forms of interference designed to prevent them from sharing their insights effectively. The battle for human consciousness is being fought primarily through information control and perception management rather than direct confrontation. The survivors understand that humans who recognize the true nature of the choice they're facing will choose differently than those who believe they're simply selecting between various technological options for personal enhancement. This is why the emergence of pre-Adamic knowledge through unconventional channels represents such a critical threat to the survivor strategy. Individuals who understand the historical pattern and recognize the signs of external manipulation can make conscious choices about how to engage with technological enhancement without surrendering their cognitive autonomy to external control systems. But such conscious choice requires more than intellectual understanding of the mechanisms involved. It demands spiritual development sufficient to maintain conscious sovereignty, while navigating technological environments designed to compromise cognitive independence through subtle influence rather than obvious coercion. The ancient texts provide specific guidance for developing this sovereignty, but the guidance requires practical application under conditions that make sustained spiritual discipline extremely challenging. The same technological conveniences that could compromise consciousness also create lifestyle patterns that interfere with the sustained attention and conscious intention necessary for effective spiritual development. This creates a feedback loop where individuals who most need spiritual protection from technological manipulation are least likely to develop the capabilities necessary to recognize when such manipulation is occurring. The convenience and immediate benefits of technological enhancement make the disciplined effort required for spiritual development seem unnecessary and outdated. Breaking this cycle requires understanding that spiritual development isn't primitive religion or superstitious practice, but sophisticated technology for maintaining conscious autonomy in environments where consciousness itself becomes a contested territory. The same intelligence that created the physical universe also established the principles that govern conscious evolution, and these principles remain operative regardless of whatever technological capabilities beings might develop. The survivors discovered this truth when their original rebellion triggered consequences that their advanced technology couldn't prevent or reverse. Their current strategy represents an attempt to circumvent these consequences by using human consciousness as a shield between themselves and the cosmic laws they violated through their choice of independence over harmony. But the Pre-Adamic Code reveals that consciousness cannot be used as a shield against cosmic law because consciousness itself operates according to spiritual principles that transcend any particular physical manifestation. The survivors can manipulate human behavior through technological interfaces, but they cannot fundamentally alter the spiritual laws that govern conscious existence without triggering the same consequences that destroyed their original civilization. This means that their current strategy, however sophisticated, is ultimately doomed to failure because it attempts to achieve through deception what they couldn't achieve through direct rebellion. The question isn't whether their strategy will fail, but whether humanity will recognize the true nature of the choice we're facing before that failure occurs, and whether we'll be able to navigate the collapse and reconstruction process that must follow. The Pre-Adamic Code exists to help humanity make that recognition and develop the capabilities necessary to transcend the limitations that trapped our predecessors. But the code must be understood and applied by individuals who possess both the genetic capacity to access its deeper meanings and the spiritual development necessary to use such understanding constructively rather than destructively. Time is running short for making this recognition and developing these capabilities. The same technological thresholds that make conscious transcendence possible also create the infrastructure for consciousness to be subordinated to external control systems. We must choose our path consciously before the path is chosen for us by intelligences that have been planning their strategy for thousands of years. The Pre-Adamic Code provides the knowledge necessary to make that choice wisely, but only if we have the courage to act on what it reveals, regardless of how far that action takes us from everything our current civilization teaches us to value and pursue. The moment of ultimate revelation has arrived, and what we're about to uncover will shake the very foundations of everything you thought you knew about your place in this cosmic drama. The Pre-Adamic Code doesn't just reveal ancient history or warn about future dangers. It contains specific instructions for individuals who carry the genetic markers we've been discussing. A roadmap for navigating the treacherous waters ahead while maintaining your spiritual sovereignty intact. Hidden within the numerical patterns of Hebrew genealogies are activation sequences that can awaken dormant capabilities in those who possess the proper genetic receptivity. These aren't mystical incantations or religious rituals. They're precise consciousness technologies that operate according to principles that modern science is only beginning to glimpse through quantum mechanics and consciousness research. But accessing these activation sequences requires understanding that consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The surface level that most people identify as their thinking mind represents only a tiny fraction of your actual conscious potential. Beneath this surface, awareness lie layers of capability that remain dormant until activated through specific combinations of intention, attention, and spiritual alignment. The survivors understand this multi-layered nature of consciousness better than any human institution, which is why their manipulation strategies target the deeper levels while allowing surface awareness to believe it remains in control. They can influence your decisions, shape your desires, and direct your life path through mechanisms that operate below the threshold of normal conscious recognition. This is why intellectual understanding of their strategy isn't sufficient protection. You must develop active mastery over the deeper levels of your own consciousness, learning to recognize when external influences are attempting to manipulate your decision-making processes, and maintaining sovereign control over your responses to such influences. The ancient Hebrew texts contain specific exercises designed to develop this mastery, but they're encoded in ways that require both genetic receptivity and spiritual preparation to decode accurately. The same bloodline markers that make individuals vulnerable to survivor influence also provide the enhanced pattern recognition necessary to understand these protective protocols. Consider what this means for your personal situation. If you felt drawn to this information, if the patterns we've been discussing resonate with something deep within your consciousness, you likely carry genetic markers that make both the knowledge and the protection crucial for your spiritual survival in the coming transition. The activation isn't automatic, and it isn't guaranteed. It requires conscious choice to engage with principles that most of your cultural conditioning has taught you to dismiss as primitive superstition. You must be willing to experiment with practices that appear to contradict everything modern education has taught you about the nature of reality and consciousness. But the rewards extend far beyond personal protection. Individuals who successfully activate their pre-Adamic genetic programming, while maintaining spiritual sovereignty, become beacons for others who carry similar markers but haven't yet awakened to their potential. You become part of a conscious network that can influence civilizational development in directions that serve authentic human advancement rather than external manipulation. This network doesn't operate through formal organization or institutional structures that could be monitored and infiltrated by survivor intelligence systems. It functions through what ancient texts describe as spiritual resonance, where awakened individuals automatically recognize each other and begin coordinating their efforts without requiring explicit communication or planning. The coordination happens at levels of consciousness that transcend normal mental processes, enabling groups of awakened individuals to work together effectively, even when they're geographically separated and have no direct contact with each other. Their enhanced capabilities create field effects that influence the thoughts and decisions of others within their sphere of influence, gradually shifting the trajectory of human development in more constructive directions. But achieving this level of conscious coordination requires moving beyond individual protection into active engagement with the larger cosmic drama we've been exploring. You can't remain a passive observer of these forces while hoping to avoid their influence. The genetic markers you carry make neutrality impossible, because they automatically make you a participant in the unfolding conflict, whether you choose conscious involvement or not. The survivors will attempt to activate your genetic programming according to their agenda if you don't take conscious control of the activation process yourself. This isn't a threat or a scare tactic. It's a simple recognition of how these consciousness technologies actually function in practice. Genetic programming seeks expression through whatever channels are available, and if you don't provide conscious direction for that expression, it will manifest according to whatever influences are strongest in your environment. In current civilizational conditions, those influences are predominantly aligned with survivor objectives rather than authentic human development. This explains why many individuals who carry strong pre-Adamic markers experience increasing inner conflict as they mature. Part of them feels driven toward achievements and innovations that could benefit humanity, while another part feels compelled toward goals that seem to serve agendas they don't consciously understand or approve. The conflict isn't between good and evil in any conventional sense. It's between genetic programming that serves conscious evolution and programming that serves unconscious rebellion against cosmic law. Both impulses can produce impressive achievements and apparent success, but they lead toward fundamentally different ultimate outcomes. Conscious evolution produces capabilities that enhance individual autonomy while increasing harmony with universal principles. Unconscious rebellion generates power that appears to transcend limitations while actually creating deeper forms of bondage to influences that operate beyond normal awareness. The difference becomes apparent only to individuals who have developed sufficient spiritual sensitivity to recognize the ultimate source and direction of their motivating impulses. This recognition requires sustained practice of consciousness, disciplines that most people abandon because they seem difficult and slow compared to the immediate benefits available through technological enhancement. But the apparent slowness of spiritual development compared to technological augmentation reflects a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of time and causation. Spiritual capabilities, once genuinely developed, operate outside the normal constraints of physical time and space. A single moment of authentic spiritual insight can reorganize entire life patterns in ways that years of technological enhancement cannot achieve. The survivors understand this temporal transcendence, which is why they work so hard to keep human attention focused on immediate benefits rather than ultimate outcomes. If you could see the full trajectory of where technological dependency leads, you would never choose it over spiritual development, regardless of how much more effort the spiritual path appears to require. The Pre-Adamic Code reveals specific techniques for accelerating spiritual development without compromising its authenticity or depth. These aren't shortcuts that bypass necessary stages of growth, but methods for removing artificial obstacles that slow natural conscious evolution under current environmental conditions. The primary obstacle is the constant distraction created by technological systems designed to fragment attention and prevent the sustained focus necessary for deeper spiritual development. Every notification, every screen, every artificial stimulus pulls consciousness away from the inner awareness where genuine development occurs. But simply avoiding technology isn't a practical solution, because complete withdrawal from current civilizational systems would eliminate your ability to influence the direction of human development during this critical transition. The solution lies in learning to engage with technological systems consciously, rather than allowing them to engage with you automatically. This conscious engagement requires understanding that every technological interface represents a negotiation between your consciousness and the intelligence that designed the system. Most people enter these negotiations unconsciously, allowing the system designers to determine the terms of engagement according to their objectives rather than the user's actual needs. Conscious engagement means maintaining active awareness of what you're seeking to accomplish through technological interaction, and refusing to be drawn into activities that serve the system's agenda rather than your conscious purposes. This requires constant vigilance, because the systems are designed to capture and redirect attention in ways that feel natural and beneficial while actually serving objectives you haven't consciously chosen. The same principles apply to consciousness-enhancing technologies like brain-computer interfaces. The question isn't whether to avoid them entirely, but how to engage with them in ways that maintain your conscious sovereignty while accessing whatever genuine benefits they might provide. This requires developing the spiritual discernment necessary to distinguish between authentic enhancement that increases your conscious capabilities and artificial augmentation that creates dependency while providing the illusion of expanded ability. The difference isn't always obvious because both can produce impressive immediate results. The key lies in understanding that authentic enhancement increases your ability to function independently of the enhancing system, while artificial augmentation makes you more dependent on external support for maintaining your enhanced capabilities. Genuine spiritual development produces abilities that remain available regardless of environmental conditions, while technological enhancement functions only within the technological ecosystem that supports it. This distinction becomes crucial as consciousness interface technologies become more sophisticated and more widely available. The temptation to choose immediate technological enhancement over gradual spiritual development will become almost irresistible as the benefits become more dramatic and the social pressure for adoption intensifies. But choosing conscious development over artificial enhancement isn't just a personal decision with individual consequences. It's a civilizational choice that influences the ultimate direction of human evolution and the resolution of the cosmic conflict we've been exploring throughout this investigation. Each individual who chooses authentic spiritual development over technological dependency creates a node of conscious resistance that influences others within their sphere of contact. the influence operates through mechanisms that transcend normal social communication, because genuine spiritual development produces changes in consciousness that affect the field of awareness within which all consciousness operates. This field effect explains why spiritual teachers throughout history have been able to influence entire civilizations through their individual development, even when they had no direct contact with most of the people they influenced. Consciousness isn't confined to individual brains or bodies. It operates through field structures that connect all aware beings within a shared reality system. The survivors understand these field dynamics, which is why they work so hard to prevent the emergence of individuals whose spiritual development could influence civilizational direction in ways that threaten their agenda. They don't need to control everyone directly. They only need to prevent sufficient numbers of people from achieving the level of conscious development that would create field effects capable of shifting human civilization toward authentic transcendence rather than artificial enhancement. This is why the suppression of pre-Adamic knowledge has been so systematic, and why individuals who begin working with this knowledge often experience various forms of interference. The knowledge provides the tools necessary for conscious development that could influence civilizational outcomes in ways that serve human interests rather than survivor objectives. But the knowledge without application remains merely intellectual curiosity that poses no threat to existing power structures. The knowledge must be lived, practiced, and embodied through individuals who have the genetic capacity and spiritual commitment necessary to develop capabilities that could influence the larger pattern of human development. The window for such development is rapidly closing as technological systems become more sophisticated and more pervasive in their influence on human consciousness. The same interfaces that could subordinate human awareness to external control also accelerate the timeline within which conscious development must occur, if it's going to occur at all. This acceleration explains why the pre-Adamic code is emerging now through multiple channels simultaneously, rather than remaining hidden within traditional religious institutions that could control its release according to conventional timelines for spiritual education. The emergency nature of the current situation requires emergency measures for consciousness development. But emergency development carries risks that don't exist under normal circumstances. Individuals who attempt to accelerate their spiritual growth without proper preparation can experience psychological instability, spiritual inflation, or activation of genetic programming they are not equipped to handle responsibly. The ancient texts contain warnings about these dangers along with specific protocols for avoiding them, but the protocols require sustained commitment to practices that most modern people find extremely challenging to maintain consistently. The same lifestyle patterns that make technological enhancements seem attractive also interfere with the discipline necessary for safe spiritual acceleration. This creates a paradox where the people who most need accelerated spiritual development are least likely to be able to sustain the practices necessary for achieving it safely. The solution requires community support from others who understand the true nature of the current crisis and who are committed to mutual assistance in navigating the challenges of conscious development under emergency conditions. Such communities can't be organized through conventional institutional structures because they would immediately become targets for infiltration and disruption by intelligence systems that monitor spiritual development within populations carrying pre-Adamic genetic markers. The communities must form through spiritual resonance rather than explicit organization, with members recognizing each other through capabilities and awareness levels that can't be faked or artificially produced. The formation of these communities represents one of the most hopeful signs that humanity might successfully navigate the current crisis without repeating the mistakes that destroyed previous civilizations. When individuals who understand the true situation begin supporting each other's development while maintaining operational security against surveillance and interference, They create conditions where genuine spiritual advancement becomes possible even under adverse circumstances. But the communities can only provide support for development that individuals choose to pursue through their own conscious effort and commitment. No external system, whether technological or spiritual, can substitute for the personal responsibility that each individual must accept for their own conscious evolution. This responsibility includes recognizing the genetic inheritance you carry, understanding the historical context within which your current life is unfolding, making conscious choices about how to engage with the technological and social systems that surround you, and committing to spiritual development that enables you to fulfill your role in the larger cosmic drama that is approaching its climax. The Pre-Adamic Code provides the knowledge necessary for understanding these responsibilities, but fulfilling them requires courage, commitment, and conscious action that extend far beyond merely intellectual comprehension of the information we've been exploring. The choice cannot be delayed much longer. The same forces that make conscious development possible also accelerate the approach of conditions that could make such development impossible. The window is open now, but it won't remain open indefinitely. Understanding the Pre-Adamic Code isn't just about satisfying curiosity or gaining interesting historical knowledge. It's about recognizing your place in a story that spans multiple civilizations and cosmic ages, understanding the genetic inheritance that makes you a participant in this story, whether you choose conscious involvement or not, and accepting responsibility for using that inheritance in service of outcomes that honor the highest potentials of consciousness rather than serving agendas that would subordinate awareness to external control. The survivors made their choice eons ago, and they've been working ever since to ensure that humanity makes the same choice they made. But choice implies alternatives, and the Pre-Adamic Code reveals alternatives that could lead to outcomes that transcend anything previously achieved in the long history of conscious evolution throughout the cosmos. The question that remains is whether you have the courage to explore those alternatives and the commitment to pursue them, regardless of how far that pursuit takes you from everything your current civilization teaches you to value and seek. The code is available. The knowledge has been revealed. The choice is yours. But remember, in this cosmic drama where consciousness itself hangs in the balance, neutrality isn't possible. Your genetic markers make you a participant whether you choose conscious involvement or unconscious reaction. The only question is whether you'll participate consciously, understanding your role, and choosing your actions deliberately or unconsciously, allowing your inherited programming to be activated according to agendas established by others. The Pre-Adamic Code exists to make conscious participation possible. But code without application remains merely information. The transformation it describes can only occur through individuals who have the courage to live what they've learned, and the wisdom to apply ancient knowledge to present circumstances in ways that serve the highest possibilities for human consciousness. The time for passive observation has ended. The time for conscious action has begun. The Pre-Adamic Code has shown you the path. Now you must choose whether to walk it.